Neutral colors are not boring, despite what you may think. The important thing about neutrals is you just need to know how to style them and make them more interesting. Most of us know the term neutral as being a color that kind of lacks color, or at least color intensity. So this is referring to the grays and beiges and the grays of the world that are ultimately a little more soft, muted, and undersaturated. To a lot of you, none of that sounds very exciting, does it? How can something that's designed to be kind of gray leaning to be exciting in the slightest? For me, I enjoy the versatility of neutral colors because by nature, they suit a wider variety of design styles. So if you're not entirely experienced with putting color palettes together, or if you're like me and you just like to change things up on a regular basis, it's much more easy to do if you're already starting with a base of those more subtle color options. This also means that if you do decide to switch things up and add something extremely punchy in a particular part of your home, it's a bit less likely to clash with another strong competing color because everything else is neutral. But I know that's not good enough for all of you, which is why I want to teach you how to elevate and add some intrigue to your neutrals. Today, I'm gonna take you through the TTV of neutrals. It's a Paint People exclusive. And you can use this acronym to really add some excitement to an otherwise boring neutral color palette. Also, a big thank you to our friends over at Mighty Boards for making our favorite color testing boards, but more on them just a bit later on. The first letter is T, which stands for temperature. And this is something that I always make sure to at least play around with when I'm putting together a color palette. Pretty much any color you look at will either be a little warmer or cooler, or very much so one way or the other. I think the tendency for a lot of people is to stick to one and just commit. Just dive into the warm side or the cool side, which is probably the easier choice if you're keeping things a little more monochromatic and easy to follow. If you like cooler grays, you just pick a few varieties of blue leaning ones of varying degrees and you're good to go. Your color palette is done. The only issue I have with that is it can feel a bit stale to some people. There's not a whole lot to really pique your interest when everything is just so similar, right? There are ways to pull this off, however. If you're intentionally going for a specific monochromatic color scheme, like you're actually knowing all these colors are the same and you're just riding with it. It could look pretty interesting, but I find it's more effective when you're focusing on one color hue, like a blue room or a green room. Not quite as exciting when you just have a gray room, right? So this is why I love mixing up my neutrals within this space, specifically in regards to their color temperature. So currently my kitchen has gray cabinets, which I do not want to change for the next couple of years because they're in great shape. So instead of keeping everything that almost cement gray coloration, I went the opposite way and got some beautiful beigey bar stools and a wooden mosaic dining room table and some deep mustard brown chairs, just to reincorporate some of that warmth, those warmer color temperatures. There is a color palette rule I've talked about in the past called the 60-30-10 rule that we try to aim for. And this accounts not only for your wall colors or your paint colors, but your furniture, your flooring, even your ceiling. So in that living area downstairs, I would say my 60 is more of an off-white, including the walls and the ceiling. The 30 is a slightly cooler earthy gray, represented by my kitchen cabinets, the couches, and then the fireplace to sort of mirror everything. And then that final 10 is represented with nice warmy beiginess in the form of natural woods, rattan, jute, all those wonderful comforting materials. Today's sponsor, Mighty Boards, can really help you visualize a color's temperature because they are these really large, wonderfully made paintable tester boards that you can paint your neutrals on and then compare them. To me, that's actually one of the easiest ways to get a true sense of a color's temperature in real life, in person, is to actually compare them to something that's definitively warm, like your yellow rain jacket or something. Or on the flip side, something very cool, like something blue. That's the great thing about Mighty Boards is how versatile they are. Or you can use them in the more traditional sense of trying out a paint color before buying it, which we always recommend. You can also have two different neutrals next to one another so you can really see and feel which one looks a little warmer or cooler. Best practice for me is to take your painted Mighty board and just place it against something as neutral as possible. And I mean truly neutral, like a pure white door or something, just to give you a more objective interpretation of the color. But there are many things you can do with these, and they're definitely our tester boards of choice. You should be able to pick up some Mighty boards at your local paint store in North America. If not, I'll leave their information down below so you can spread the word to other stores. So we've been talking about color temperatures, right? You could really elevate this concept even further, take it to the next level by changing up the undertones of your neutrals, because warm can be represented with yellow and orange and red. There's not just one type of warmth or one type of cool. This might sound a bit intimidating because now we're dealing with color hue coming through, which might be trickier to manage and make work. But you're probably already doing this without even knowing it in many cases. Your flooring might have a touch of a red undertone that's not all that noticeable, but then those new nesting tables you just bought, has a touch of greeniness in the wood. Technically, those undertones are actually in competition. They're complementary, but it's no big deal because not only are they neutral, just by virtue of being undersaturated, you're also dealing with natural materials. And that leads me straight into our next T, which is texture. Another great way to break up the monotony of a neutral design is to play with smooth and rough. You often see this pretty prominently in Scandi design, which utilizes a lot of neutrals, more so on the lighter side of things too, but there's still a lot of visual interest because of all the textures that are utilized, whether it's jute rugs, fuzzy pillows, furry area rugs, or even varied wood types. Surfaces that are textured are by nature interesting because they have the ability to kind of manipulate the light that hits it, which gives it much more depth than a perfectly smooth surface, even to the point where a color might look different, like a light gray blanket that actually looks a little bit darker underneath all those light fuzzy bits. Very technical terminology there. My tips to those of you that are a little intimidated by the idea of incorporating texture is to start with those more natural materials like woods and wool and fabrics. And if you're like me, going through a bit of a Japandi phase, you can also have some rattan and some dark metallics as well. Because technically, smooth is a type of texture, so you don't want to go rough, rough, rough everywhere. Ruff, ruff, ruff. Doggy. A large part of what we talk about on the Paint People channel is paint-related stuff, right? I guess your walls. But texture doesn't normally apply to what goes on your walls, right? I mean, there are things you can do like board and batten, there's lime wash, Venetian plastering that can add some physical texture to your walls. But for the most part, your walls end up looking pretty smooth, right? Texture could also be perceived outside of the physical or the tangible realm. You can also interpret texture in a more visual sense in the form of patterns like stripes, ragging, smooshing, and especially wallpaper. I mean, even a lot of modern wallpaper these days have a textural component built in. So there really is so much you can do to style your neutral room. So we've gone through the two T's of temperature and texture. Let's finish up with our V, which is value. Value has so many different meanings in different contexts, but specifically talking about color theory, a color value is describing how light or dark it is. As a color's value goes up, it gets lighter and lighter, and the opposite is true for darker ones. One of the more forgotten ways to style up your neutrals is to just add varying levels of depth. So even a gray room will look a lot more interesting if you're incorporating grays of all different values, ranging from black all the way to white and everything in between. There's a really simple way to figure out any paint color's value, and we describe it in this video all about LRV. Now that you know about our TTV approach to styling neutrals, this is an acronym that you should be very familiar with.